bought like a collection of plants off Amazon. It's just like a grab bag. I didn't really like them.
You don't like what we got?
No, there's some on the floor over there. They're like,
I think they look good.
Yeah. I'm going to plant those and see what they...
This one looks great.
Yeah, this one's awesome.
Yeah. It was just a collection? And this one was new too? Or no, that's old?
That was new. They're all new.
Yeah,
I think those two back there are the only two that survived. Oh, and this guy.
Yeah. Cool. Plants do a lot, In New York, it's important. Wildlife.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of nature in New York, if you think about it.
Like cockroaches and rats?
I've been looking at apartments near Battery Park City, and it's crazy. Like, you walk down there, and it's like you're in the middle of a huge park.
Yeah. Well, that's like another world. It's like really not New York City.
It really is. It's really cool. I like it. Can someone subsidize my rent by $1,000 a month so I can afford a floor-to-ceiling window apartment? I want it. $1,000 a month. If I find $1,000 a month in new EmberMap subscriptions, will you let me extract it for the purpose of subsidizing my rent?
You could start like a Kickstarter.
Or a subscription video site.
Kickstarter. Help me afford this beautiful apartment.
It'll make the videos that much better. Did I tell you that my Bose headphones broke? Just like the plastic part of it. It's ridiculous, man. Those things, what are they? $350?
Yeah.
I love those things. I've had them for like 3 years. But like, if you pick it up, you can see like the
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Isn't that ridiculous?
I don't want to mess with this because I'll make it way worse.
I found a YouTube video explaining how to fix it, and they're like, and now you just resolder it. And I was like, nope. I was like, maybe if you found 15-year-old Sam.
Be a no for me.
If you found 15-year-old Sam, I might be willing to do that. But I watched the video on 2x, and it still took like 8.5 minutes, and I was like, there's no way.
Yeah, there's basically two versions of you that want to do that, like 15-year-old Sam, and then if you have like a 15-year-old kid. That's it.
It's
Everything
so
in between is
so
like,
true.
I'm not doing that.
I know. I don't even want to mow my own lawn ever again. just out of spite for all the times I had to do yard work growing up.
Dude, I had like a push mower. No motor or anything, just the blade.
I don't know if I've ever actually done that, but I did a push one that was a gas.
Those gas.
I had a actual rider.
Oh, come on. You had a ride. Get out of here. Oh.
One of the most embarrassing pictures of me ever is me on a rider with long hair, overweight. I actually think I had blonde highlights in my hair.
Folks, this will be in the show notes.
And I'm sitting there on a rider like on a Saturday. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do lawn work again. I'm always going to live in the city, in a small place, pay people to do my laundry, pay people to do my yard work. Just out of spite for doing yard work growing up. It doesn't build character, It doesn't teach you anything. Nah. Yard work is the worst. Pulling weeds out of your driveway.
That's something I had. I had the
weed whacker?
The thing that spun. It had like the plastic things, and it would just
cut up your legs.
You're like, so much work. 30 seconds later, all gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't miss that. That is one thing I like living in a city for. I'm a fan of that. I think a lot of people are. I know they say people don't buy houses as much anymore, and they rent more, and they don't. I bet if you make riding lawnmowers, business has been down in the last decade. Am I right? Am I wrong? That's not a good business to be in.
So no Uber for riding lawnmowers?
Hey, now that's a good idea.
So the Uber of riding lawnmowers.
Everything's rental. What was something else that has become rental recently that I was like, man, that's brilliant. Like, you don't even need to buy that. You just rent it. It was something ridiculous.
Silverware?
No, really. It was something like that. It was something that you'd be like, oh, wow, you can just not own this and rent it when I need it. I can't remember what it was.
It's your dream to just come home to an empty apartment.
Yeah.
Like literal empty apartment, and just press a button on an app to get what you need.
When you get on the subway on the way home, you say, hey, Siri, I'm heading home. And then everything just happens, and all of the services people come over there and they bring you. They put together a new bed. They make it right just in time. That way you always have the latest stuff. It's like leasing a car, but you just lease everything in your apartment. The chef's getting dinner ready, When you go away, all of it's torn down and your space is rented out that day to other people through like Airbnb. So like your maximum usage of your space, minimum waste. Pretty good.
I would Okay, we gotta get this podcast started.
You would what?
I was gonna say, if you could, like, you know how like hotels have like checkout times at like 11 a.m. And
Yeah.
a lot of them now are like 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Which is better. But if you have like a nighttime flight, it's super annoying. And so I would, if you could just rent a place for like a day,
Yeah.
especially in New York City,
Yeah.
that'd be
Yes.
awesome.
Yep.
Like have a shower, couch, TV.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. What are we gonna talk about?
Programming. I've been working on the Mirage website. We did get it out. I was fun because I was listening to the podcast like last week when I published it at the beginning, and we were like, oh, we don't know if this is going to be ready or not, but here we are. We're going to be there next week drinking coffee, talking about MirageJS.com after a long few days, and it did turn out to be a long few days. I was up till like 6 a.m. one day just kind of getting things tightened up, and there were still things I didn't like, but it was fun to feel the pressure of a deadline, and we had kind of committed to it. So it was fun getting the site up. We've had people signing up for it. And really our goal is like now I want to be really laser focused and just make something that is going to be sure to solve people's problems. You know, one thing we've talked about is like the last year or two, we've been doing consulting. We've been making videos on EmberMap. We're not in the same spot we were 4 years ago when we were heads down on all these apps. Like there's something to building apps in a real world situation with real world constraints. And we had a conference coming up every 3 or 6 months, and we had people who were relying on the software we were writing. And that was the environment which Mirage came out of originally, which is one of the reasons it became a useful tool, because it was solving kind of real world problems. And so we try to stay in touch as much as possible with people's real world problems through, you know, our Slack channel, through our videos, through our consulting, but there's nothing I think really like working on that. So thinking about bringing Mirage to like the JavaScript community and making sure it solves the problems of folks who already know it and are familiar with it, but also kind of this new audience as well. I think that's going to could be tricky, or it's going to be something that we're going to focus on.
Yeah. One thought I had is Mirage, my light bulb moment with Mirage was testing. So I remember before Mirage, I had I was working on an app where you could it was like a giant data table, and there were a million filters and sorting and pagination, and it was filters. The filters were the most difficult because you could combine filters or you could create these. Basically, it's like a query builder through drop downs. And,
oh my God, query builder and drop down. It's like every developer just ticked, like in their car.
Yeah. So I think I was using Pretender. And I had a Pretender file that was just like, it was this app had one route. And it was just, it would read everything, do all this. And I wanted this thing to work locally. This is before I really understood the whole front end first thing, but I wanted everything to work locally, especially with like testing, and it would have been easy to just like assert the right query gets sent to the server, but I wanted to interact with it and see it. And this thing was like, dude, I was like using like Lambda.js to compose, like to read all these properties out of the query string, like build up a data structure, get it through Lambda's functions to actually filter all the data, which were just a bunch of pojos. And switching to Mirage was just like removed so much code.
That's awesome.
So anyway, like getting back on topic, bring Mirage over to like the other users. Like testing might be a good little, beachhead.
Yeah, that's good. It's also just a big open question, which is why we're going to try to do like research too and talk with people. It's like maybe people making modern JavaScript apps, like a lot of them don't come from a testing background, or that's not an important thing for them. Like you can definitely find people on Twitter flippantly talking about like testing, disregarding it, or saying that's not, the high level test that we kind of like, and give us that kind of confidence that those aren't valuable. So it's going to be.
I've seen more folks though on Twitter.
Yeah,
I feel like
the pendulum's swinging back.
Yeah,
I know Kent C. Dodds is big in the React community and talks a lot about the kind of testing that we're in favor as. But I think I saw him the other day saying he's been saying this for years, and there's like a lot of people and teams he sees that don't do this kind of thing. So I think it's important to find out what matters to people, what pain points they're really having, and to make sure that it solves those pain points. the testing thing is one beachhead. Another one is like your API is not ready yet. And some people will say like that's nothing to do with testing. It's just like I want to work on my front end, and like we have a consulting client who's going to be delivering the back end API, but they're not ready, and we want to work on like the dynamic parts of the UI. It's a separate story.
Yeah, totally.
But I think those things are close enough that Mirage does solve multiple points. I don't know if there's a risk there. It's more like the positioning and the marketing as opposed to like the actual code. But the other big open question is like the modeling side, the domain modeling side. And, those of us in the Ember world, a lot of us come from Rails background, come from traditional architectures that are relational, backed by relational database and REST API. And I know that's not how a lot of JavaScript developers work these days. So thinking about...
Wait, can I push back on that?
Yeah. That's why I invited you today.
A lot of the Rails folks that I follow on Twitter are doing React development, and they still they were like hardcore Rails people. So I can't imagine them have completely written off the whole having models. And yeah, I see them taking those values from Rails and bringing them over to...
I think it's an open question for me because I've seen Rails folks back in the day saying things like, oh yeah, models and collections, but remember like JavaScript, we have arrays and objects. That's all we need. And no SQL databases obviating the need for some kind of relationships. And, even Dan Abramoff talking about ORMs, and obviously he's like a big name in the React community. So the question is just like, it's interesting. There's a lot. It's just interesting. Like I was on Airbnb's website the other day, and if you like click a link and then you're in settings and you go back, like you have a skeleton screen and like all these different data fields like start popping in, and it's very strict, like disorienting. It's like not a nice paint, like on initial render, like fetching the whole data model. And it might just be because that's kind of how a lot of people build sites, where they just like, oh, I need this and this and this. Mm-hmm. And like GraphQL is supposed to solve that with something like Relay or Suspense, which is going to aggregate all your GraphQL queries. But like that's different than an ORM. It's different. So the question is like, how much shared knowledge is and context is going to be there. The way, if you go to ember.js and look at the story it tells, it jumps into models pretty quick because it can assume that we all have that shared understanding. And that's part of what makes Mirage powerful today in the context of a traditional app with like an Ember front end, because if you can assume the models are there and the relationships are there, the shorthands can do so much work for you, right? And Mirage's ORM can do so much work for you. And for me personally, that's a big part of the value proposition, because I don't want to write that code over and over again. But also, like when we started, we just had the database, and like that was still super valuable. And I still think if that's as far as you get with Mirage, it's still super valuable. Mm-hmm. It's still the right tool for that. So on the flip side, like I talked to Alex Lafroisha, and they used Poly at Netflix, which means they didn't feel like the need for having the Mirage route handler set up, but they actually did feel like they missed the Mirage ORM, and that was what they wish they had. So if they could have used that part of it, they would have. So that's kind of a flip of it, mm-hmm. where the ORM stuff is actually the more valuable part of Mirage instead of like the part that might not apply. So it's kind of interesting to think about.
How are you going to go about validating this? Because I feel like I could find 5 people that love the ORM and 5 people that will tell you to never use an ORM.
That's a great question. So one thing we had talked about with the new site that we're building is like originally it was like, we already have all the docs in ember.mirage.com for the project, and we're going to port those over. And I think it's going to be partly about making the positioning right and making the library palatable to modern JavaScript developers who are not using Ember, and partly making sure we get that value proposition right for like the first user, like the ideal first user or whatever. I think we're going to rewrite the docs in a kind of piecemeal way. I think the first step, I just want to have a docs page that's like /docs, and it's like a 1-pager that's like the core, like getting started, yep. And start using that with people and showing that, doing some live streaming with people and just like getting it into their project and seeing again, like what is their pain point where I think that this could solve it if they even have one, right? So I think that's the way to do it. And then to just see what happens from there. Because like once Mirage got going in Ember, there wasn't really a question of what people needed most, because by their usage and issues and pull requests, you get a really good sense. And if you're a good maintainer, you learn a lot just from that stuff and the questions that people ask about. You still need to have a vision for how the things, because you're the only person who can really see that. I do believe that. But like you are in touch and know if the thing you're writing is solving people's problems. Like, and, you know, we talked a lot last week about the lower level APIs versus a high level. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot. If Dan Abramov wanted to come back and add functionality to Redux, he would know what the immediate pain points are once you start down that road, because there's been all these other libraries that have added that. So he would know what to do next. But he can also say, no, my vision for this project is to keep it really small and limited in scope. And so that's why it's done or whatever.
Yeah, that was another thing I was going to say about the ORM is it feels like you kind of have a pass right now to just completely ignore it, because if you're going to buy into these lower level APIs, then the ORM layer is not I don't, the DB is a lower level version of the ORM.
Right.
And
so maybe there's a compositional way, an API that lets you do that. Because I still want that, and I still want that experience to be good for people, but it's all about escape hatches. And, you know, even like these Gatsby APIs we've been using, like sometimes some of the plugin authors have these cute little Tailwind true or little sugar things on top. And then it's like, you eventually need to configure it. And then it's like, why did I ever do this in the first place? I would have rather you just let me like import a Tailwind extractor and put on extractors. So then I just know what I'm working with.
Yeah.
Yep. So
because we have an extra character in our CSS that is not part of a Tailwind commit.
Yes. So I think that's just going to be something that is going to really influence the future API decisions in Mirage, thinking about escape hatches, thinking about the lower level stuff and everything. But yeah, I think the next step is the docs site and just getting that story really crisp and easy to use to start with, making a video, showing it, using it in a React and Vue app.
Nice. One thing about the doc site is I went through, I set up tests in our Gatsby app, and I went through, they have a couple pages for testing Gatsby. And the docs, it wasn't like Ember, where you just like Ember.G acceptance test and you're off to the races. There was a lot of setup, but I didn't, it's not a bad thing. Like I didn't have to understand the setup.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, create a jest config file and paste this in. And I have no idea what I pasted in.
Right.
And I didn't care.
Right.
And so
sometimes that's okay.
Yeah, it made me think like, oh, I wonder if there's like some stuff. It made me think for setting up Mirage.
Yeah.
I think there's like, we actually have some flexibility here.
Yeah.
Where we can tell someone, oh, just paste this in as your, I don't know, as your default config or something like that.
Instead of saying you have to put a file here in this location and we kind of magically wire it up like this.
Yeah, exactly. The magical wiring up. Because there's a lot of, I think as Ember developers, we always talk about this, but we expect that I Ember install and everything's wired up for me.
I do like that, and there are parts of me that I've missed about that the last 2 weeks working on the Gatsby site, because at this point we have, since everyone's doing their own thing, it is kind of funny because it doesn't take long. You look at your site, and now I have, like, if you look at the root of the site, I mean, maybe we can pull it up, right? But it's like, it's seriously, we have a Tailwind config in the root. We have a purge CSS config.
We have a jest config.
You've got a jest config. Yeah, the jest thing itself added a lot of new files and different locations. You've got loader shim, post CSS, and then like in the actual Gatsby config, you know, already we ran into something where like, oh, post CSS actually, or purge CSS actually needs to come at the end, because, you know, and that's where it makes sense once you understand it. But it does start to feel like there's more stuff you have to keep in your head. But at this point, it's still like a better trade-off. It feels like okay to make that trade-off, and like it's not bad to have to do some wiring. It's not actually that bad.
Yeah. So I think
it's about not hitting into the wall. Like
exactly,
the high-level thing is good, but then like you just don't want a wall when you don't do it.
There's a difference between I need to put all these files in my app in order to get started, and I need to understand how to wire all this stuff up before to get started.
Right.
So even though I created like 6 files for I had to go create a mocks folder and put like a file mock and stuff like that in there. But I don't actually have to understand what that's doing. And if I ever do, well, just to get started, I don't have to understand it. It's not a question of should I or whatever. It's just I don't. So it was just setting up for testing. It was a little longer than Ember install, but I never felt like, oh man, this sucks. There's so much configuration. Never felt that way, just because you keep moving. There's never that slowdown.
That's good. I think it would be good to look also like a lot of the feature requests for Ember Mirage, look at all those and see if there's some lower level APIs we could expose that people could build those themselves. And that's the kind of thing I'd be way more comfortable merging into Mirage server and letting Ember users take care of than like having these super high level things.
Yeah.
Server.once and all this kind of like, making an API happen once and then get rid of it. Like maybe there's a lower level thing that you can think of to allow that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was funny. I was working on an Ember test where I needed something like this. I needed it to like 422. I was trying to create some regression that happened in production last week. So it's like the website 422'd and it somehow did something where it put like the app in a bad state and then at 500 and then the person fixed something on another page and then it came 200.
Back. Yeah.
But the form was so messed up from this, they couldn't actually submit it to get their 200. So as a regression, I wanted to basically it was one endpoint. I wanted to 422, 500, and then 200 in Mirage to get that component in the bad state and then make sure I could write a test that asserts that like my cleaning up was actually functioning as I thought. So I wanted some way where what I did is I looked at there's like server.pretender.handlers and that has all the functions in it, but I couldn't find a mapping to the URLs. So it had like 200 handlers in it. I forget what I ended up doing. I think I
made a dynamic handler in the test and then like check some state or something.
No, because I wanted to like call super, because I wanted my last one to be like the real handler. Yeah, and it was like a beast of a handler.
Yeah, that's the other thing that we need is like a way to do that.
Yeah. So what I wanted is I wanted a way to look up a handler and like just set it as like original handler,
right? And
then overwrite it, and then as the last thing do that. So anyway, as soon as you said server.once, my low level thing is give me a way to look up a handler.
Right. Totally. Same with like track requests. There's this option you can use to turn on and track responses or track requests.
Track requests, yeah.
And then like you can look up and say, oh, what was like the third request in response and was a state, and we were like have this PR for higher level APIs that's like checking the state of the server. Did it handle this? But like that's all you need, maybe a lower level thing to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a bunch of tests that use track requests.
Right.
So I think that's like I never felt like, oh man, this is so much. Like it's pretty good. Give me all the requests and make sure that there was a request that deleted this user.
Yeah, JavaScript API. Yeah. Hey everyone. So I want to take a quick break to thank a sponsor for this week's episode. It's actually our first sponsor of the show, and that is TrueCoach. And TrueCoach is actually hiring Ember developers. I got a chance to sit down with Alex Ford, their lead front-end engineer, and I wanted to share a bit of that conversation with you so you can hear about what they're looking for. Cool, man. What's the weather like over there?
It's lovely. It just got into the 80s.
Wow.
And it's late June.
So tell me about the positions that you all are hiring for right now.
We are looking to hire positions for our web team. So we're looking for Rails engineers. We're looking for Ember and JavaScript engineers.
What's the main thing that the app does? What does it look like and who uses it?
We provide a workout builder and a set of templates for you to create programs that you can assign and individualize for your client. And a client typically works from a mobile device, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a client, I'm in a gym, probably have spotty Wi-Fi, if any Wi-Fi whatsoever, and open up the app and I have a list of, say, 7 or 8 workouts to do that day with demo videos and do them, maybe record myself, message my coach, hey, here are my results, this was super hard, I'd like to try this. And so we're really trying to solidify the communication gap and the feedback cycle between a coach and a client.
What would be one of the first things that a new Ember dev on the team would be working on?
We really love to start engineers off with testing. I'm hoping that by the time somebody starts, we get to focus on something from scratch. A brand new feature, we're looking at volume tracking, which means like tracking sets, reps, weight, tempo, and nutrition tracking, third-party integrations with, say, HealthKit and MyFitnessPal.
Wow, you weren't kidding about the feature list that y'all have.
We just want to build application code. Ember has solved so many of those hard problems for us that we can just really focus and hone in on that.
That's so cool. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to work at True Coach.
We hire honest and transparent people who love building a product and who are customer-centric, but don't take themselves too seriously. Our co-founders are so bought into Ember, which for an Ember dev is fantastic. And they want to continue to grow our Ember team, which is one of the more ambitious parts of our platform, of our app suite.
Tell me a little bit about some of the people that you work with. I know Casey. Actually, cool story about True Coach, which used to be called Fitbot. Casey, the co-founder who was the original Ember engineer on the app, I still remember one of the first kind of big companies that for me was big of someone using Mirage in their Ember app, and that was Fitbot and Casey, and he kind of sent me a Twitter message saying, this was like soon after like Mirage first came out, and he was like, Fitbot is an Ember app that uses Mirage. And I was like, what? And I went to the website and I looked, I was like, this is real? Like, I can't believe that. It's so cool. And that's kind of how
cool.
I first met Casey. And, ever since we've hung out at the Ember comps, and last year I got to hang out with all you all, and we had lunch together, and it was an awesome team. So yeah, why don't you talk about some of the actual people you work with?
One of my favorite people to work with is Emily. She was our second Ember hire. It was so obvious that we need to hire her immediately because of how great of a person is and her product knowledge just right out of the bat. And it's someone who just picked up Ember having known React from code school and just really ran with it, worked on it for probably about a year and a half, and then jumped over to the React Native app.
That's really cool, and I also think it's a testament to y'all's culture, because not everyone who's fresh out of a boot camp can be successful at every job. There's lots of places that aren't set up for those kinds of people to be successful. So that tells me a lot about how y'all are supporting each other, supporting new hires, and the fact that someone can work there for multiple years and grow in their own career at one place, I think is pretty unique these days. And the whole team is there in Boulder?
We are, yeah. We're all here in Boulder. We're looking to hire in Boulder, in Colorado. We've got a few folks who live in Denver if you're into more of a bigger city scene, and we've got a flexible work from home policy, which tends to work really well for our team right now. So it's really cool being in Colorado right now. At the Dinosaur.js conference, there was an electricity. It really feels like an emerging tech market.
If folks are interested and want to learn more about the job posting, where should they go?
I think just check out bit.ly/TrueCoachDev. That's going to link you to our engineering culture. If you think that sounds interesting, there's a link below. Just click the We're Hiring link. Yeah, check it out.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well. Alex, thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again at maybe EmberConf next year.
Appreciate you having me on.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sam.
This kind of reminds me of something else I was tweeting about this week, which was working with React and children, because I was doing a little bit of refactoring. So in the docs site, we started when we set it up as a markdown file, because the homepage is kind of like the story, and it's like just text and headings and code snippets. And so we wanted to make that markdown. And in the past, what we've done with that, like if you look at add-on docs, the way it works is it lets you write markdown, turns that markdown into HTML, and then we style it with Tailwind. And so we have this like CSS file where we use like add apply and say like .markdown space P, .markdown space H1, and then we apply some CSS to it. And that always was kind of a bummer, because Now you have two ways to do styles. Like if you need that, you have to go to that CSS file, or like otherwise you just go to templates.
It also feels like a step backwards.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm back in CSS,
Yeah.
which is where I don't want to be.
Yeah. Even though you're using Tailwind class, it's
Yeah.
like, it's just, it's a bummer. And it's like, it's caused problems before because since it is just like that dot markdown space P, you have like issues with the cascade. And you really want it scoped. So there's like some ways you can deal with this in Ember or like in other just like normal markdown compilers, which is like give every markdown compiled paragraph like a tag that's like dot markdown __ P, and like you could apply it like that. It's kind of a bummer as well because you're still like applying these things in a style file. So we originally did this in the React Gatsby app, and we were doing the same kind of thing, and it was kind of a bummer. And then also like you just have to you're limited because you don't have the full power of like having your template. And a lot of times, especially with like if you look at miragejs.com, you really want control over the spacing, and sometimes you want a margin bottom of 1.5. We just lost our lights. Can you wave over there? Oh, that's why we moved the light to the left side.
Oh.
We just moved the light in our office, and I remember why it's not over there anymore, because it hides the light. That's a problem. It's going to be an issue. Maybe we can put that somewhere else. That's a bummer. First world problems,
Maybe we can hack the light.
Yeah, we've tried that before. If anyone knows how to hack auto detecting lights in a WeWork office, hit us up on Twitter. So we did that. Sometimes you want more control. And so a paragraph, like if you just have to say in a style file, in a markdown class block, every paragraph gets a margin bottom of 16 pixels or whatever. Well, sometimes you have a text snippet or a to-dos demo and you want more, and that kind of sucks. So then we like undid all that work. We went to like just a JSX file, which is like a template in Ember, and we use like custom components like text and title. And that way we could wrap those in our own like divs with margins and stuff like that and have complete control. So that was like fine. Then we made like a snippet component that let us do syntax highlighting. That was fine. Then I came across MDX. I had heard about it from a few people, and we knew about it at the beginning, but just felt like we wanted to avoid the markdown stuff completely because we wanted more control there. But MDX turned out to be really cool. So MDX is kind of the best of both worlds in the sense where you get to write your markdown. First, instead of having to use a style file, you actually can tell MDX what to render in place of like a paragraph or a heading every time it hits one of those. And so we could just put like our little functional React components with Tailwind classes. And so we were already using those elsewhere. Now I could just map that. So when it gets to a paragraph or a list, it's just going to use those. So there's still one way to do styling. And that was really cool. So that was one like benefit. And then the second thing is like you can import components and use them in scope. And so it's basically like all JSX except for anything that's markdown. It'll turn that into markdown tags. But like now you can write a div with margins and wrap it in a to-do app or do like a tab selector thing. So it's like really kind of awesome. Like all the work I've done on like add-on docs and stuff like this over the years, like this is it's a pretty nice sweet spot.
Yeah, seems perfect for DocSite too.
Really, it does. Because like you want those MDX files, to the majority of them to be content, to be copy. Like it's just content. And it's mostly what you want is markdown, but sometimes you want little interactive examples, and now you can have like a really great escape hatch. So it's really cool. So because you are just in a JSX render function, basically, it's basically a template. First of all, it feels a lot like the proposal for template imports in Ember, which is like a way to get components into scope and render them. These MDX files are effectively Ember templates because they are just the render function. And you can't just put like let x equals foo in the top. So you are limited in that sense, but you can do anything you can do in JSX, which like I guess once you have curlies, you can do expressions there, but you can't do like variable assignment and stuff like that.
Oh, so you could, I didn't know that. So in MDX, you could do a curly with an expression.
I mean, you can do anything you can do in JSX, which is like calls to create element basically, but like you can do like class name equals and then curly and then like a JavaScript string interpolation or like some expression. like a JavaScript expression, but you can't do like let x equals semicolon. You can't like next line. You can't do anything like that. I'm not exactly sure yet. I'm still kind of learning, but you can import and then you can render things. And it's nice. It keeps it declarative, keeps it focused on the copy. So it feels a lot like the template imports in Ember. I think it'd be really cool. Ember templates, we have like a lot of global components that automatically get registered, but I guess this is part of that would be like just being able to import and render in scope. There's something really nice about whether you're in the render function in a React app or of the fact that you're in a scope. You can take advantage of lexical scope. So the idea of lexical scope is that you have reference to a variable by a scope. So like in JavaScript, we scope by function. So JavaScript functions create new scopes. Functions in JavaScript create new scopes. And so if you say like, function, and then you have another function, let x equals foo, in the outer function, you can't access x because you're not in lexical scope. But in an inner function, you can have access to things that you've declared within that function or within parent functions that you're in. And if you return those things, those create closures. So that's how scope works in JavaScript. And the idea of having a template that leverages your knowledge as a JavaScript developer of lexical scope is really, really nice, because you can look at anything and understand where it comes from in the same way that you can look at a piece of code in JavaScript and understand where things come from. So I think that's a really powerful idea, and it holds true in the render function. And in MDX, it basically takes advantage of it. And it's also the main idea behind template imports in Ember templates, because now no longer do you look at something and say, where does this come from? Right? There's imports at the top.
Yep.
You could even do other things but basically like the idea of there's a mapping that is removed when you have immediate access within lexical scope to the things that you're importing or creating. So I think that's a really huge benefit. And it's just one less thing you have to learn where these mappings come from, where are these things coming from. I think it's really important. It's something that keeps that momentum feeling going when you're writing React. It's one of the reasons React feels fast to write and fun to write, because you're just leveraging the notion of lexical scope from JavaScript. So that's a really cool part about MDX. And what else was I going to say about MDX? So because you can't just do like variable assignment in the top of the file, I was basically refactoring like this index.js file we had, which was like a big React component and had like use state and all this stuff. You can't do that in MDX. Like you can't use hooks.
As you describe this, it kind of sounds like MDX is just the return.
It's
the
literally
return
it's the JSX return function. Yeah. It's the render function.
So that makes sense.
I guess render function is the wrong way to say it, because there's no more render. It is the render function. It's just you don't actually have the area above the return value where you can assign things. So it's the return value of the render function. Yeah. So yeah, it is like the equivalent of like the template in Ember. So you can't do like use state. So the index component had like, we have that tab selector in miragejs.com where you click on like index.js or app.js to see the code snippet. And that used some state from the use state hook. And so when I was porting this over to MDX, you can't do that. And so now what it does is it nudges you to extract a declarative component that you can just import and render in the MDX file.
That's really good. Yeah. You're using this in MDX, you're using it in the return value. Therefore, it has to be declarative.
Yeah. There's nothing else to it. I mean, you're literally constrained to, right?
Now, do you feel like, so sometimes, I don't know if this is going to carry over, but sometimes in Ember, I ran into this today where it's like, I needed an expression and I had to extract the thing into a new component or a helper. And it was really silly. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hated myself for it.
Yeah.
And then I had to spend 20 minutes finding out the helper API because I can never remember.
Well, that's another part of it, which is I think that extracting things in React is has basically no ceremony because it's just a function.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask is like sometimes in Ember extracting things feels like, oh man, this is overkill and I'm making I'm making like this abstract system and I just want an expression here.
Yeah, you don't want have to give something a name.
Yeah, I mean I could see that in React. React you still have to name things. Mm-hmm. So you haven't felt that like, oh, I had this declarative piece of code, but now I actually have to extract it into its own.
So here, I mean, it was nice to be able to start with the index file. I just got reminded of something else I want to make sure I talk about. So help me remember about.
I think I know what it is. Children's stuff.
The children's stuff I haven't gotten to, but I also want to make sure and talk about like Tom had an interesting tweet about how to convince people that they're going to run into issues down the road. So I wanted to talk about that. It was nice that we were able to start with index.js and make the homepage and use state and use effect and all this stuff, because it just gets you going. You don't have to name something just to start writing it. And then you start extracting components like text and title, and that's pretty fast because like I want a title here. So that at that point, it wasn't an unnecessary extraction. Now, when I went to the MDX file and I tried copying and pasting, I literally couldn't paste in use state because it like doesn't work. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Like it doesn't work. And then I understood it, why, right? So that was like, okay, now I need to name this. Now, originally I was going to already make a tabs extracted component because I had already thought like that would be an appropriate thing to do here, but I never did it. I think it's important that I never did it to begin with because I just didn't need to. It wasn't reused. So even though there was a tabs component there, I didn't have to do that. That was a good thing. Now I was forced to do it because of the MDX thing. And now I could have put the tabs, I could have just called it something and not done like an actual abstraction in terms of like making it like abstract. So
you could call it like Mirage homepage.
Exactly.
Tabs
Demo one,
yeah.
or just the demo one or whatever. Yep. And just literally copy that part of it and put it in there. So I think that's fine. And it overall just doesn't feel as much work because there's no guidance on it. And so you could just do it however you want to. And so creating new functions, even in the same file, that's another thing. Like a lot of times I had like 3 or 4 function components in the same file. It just like feels very easy to just copy and move it up a few lines and give it a name. I don't have to like generate something. I don't have to create a new file. So that's really nice. So I think that's fine. And I think it's nice because I think the spirit of MDX is to have most of it copy. So all of a sudden, if you have like use state and use effect and like all this like HTML stuff, then it's going to be like take away from that. You basically want your MDX document to be like very readable, but also, just having the JSX escape hatch is really nice.
Yeah, mostly copy makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, because if it wasn't, you would use a component.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't feel that way. And now on to children. The point about children is one of the things I tweeted about was that going from this tiny little micro stateful part of the component where you have 2 tabs, you have an active tab, you render one of the other contents based on what the active tab is. The first time I made it was super naive. It was just like very simple. It was like there's use state, active tab. It starts at a 0 and 2 buttons. When you click on it, you just set active tab to either 0 or 1. And then you have an if active tab is equal to 0, render this snippet, else render that snippet. That's it. I wanted to extract it to tabs just because it seemed nice. And with the MDX file, I wanted to be able to kind of do that. And so it was super easy. And this is one of the cases in Ember that's not super easy. So I think Ember got a bad rap in this particular case because it is a harder one in Ember's case, but it was still the case that it was what I ran into in a real app, and it was surprising how easy it was. So basically, if you think about how you would extract that, I started with the API I wanted, tabs, tab, tab. So like you have a parent tabs, and then it has 2 child tab components. And then the tab component is like super specialized to my use case. It just has a name that it renders as like the label. And then it's children. It just renders the children. And then so the parent tabs has some state. It has active tab. It's just an index. And so what does parent tabs have to do? It has to render a button for each one of its tabs. And then it basically has to yield the active tabs children, like the block content that's passed in. I want to only render the one for the active tab.
And you might also too, when it's rendering the buttons for its children, it needs to get the names of those buttons. You can't just say there's five tabs, so I'm going to render 5 buttons. It actually has to ask the children what their names are.
Exactly. So if you think how you do this in Ember, I've done this a lot.
Can I just make a comment? This is like your what's the term, like white whale, Moby Dick or whatever.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is you.
Yes, it's so true, because it's a table of contents, right? In add-on docs, you want a dynamic table of contents. You want the host app person, the user, developer there to be able to say docs viewer as viewer, viewer.nav as nav, nav.link, nav.link, nav.link. So I've talked about this before. It's basically like the way I can always say this is like template as data, because there's data in your template that sometimes it is totally reasonable to want to access. And if you could just get the template as a data structure and look at it, sometimes that's exactly what you need. Whereas that's not really available to us in Ember. So if you have like docs nav as nav, and then you do nav.link, nav.link, what you can do with the nav, the parent nav, is yield a contextual component for each one of those links. And so when the host user renders a nav.link, you get to swap it out with something. That's your point of abstraction in Ember. In React, it's like you get to swap out the whole thing for whatever you want, and you get access to everything that was passed in, even if it's dynamic, and you can transform it in any way you want.
I mean, you do, to your point, you do have a data structure.
Right.
Children is a data structure.
Right. So children is this React thing where, and like it starts to make more sense when you think about, there's actually not a lot of like abstraction or indirection going on with React. It's literally like when you render a JSX element, it's like a call to react.create element, and then it's passing you an object, which is what they call props. And props has children, and it has things like class name. It's all just a JavaScript object. You can change it in any way you want and just return it, and it'll just apply as you expect. And so once that flip switches, you realize, so tabs, let's say my tabs parent component, and I've got two tab components. First of all, I can choose to render nothing, right? In my tabs component, I can just return P paragraph with hello world. In Ember, we could do the same thing. With tabs, you could just, in the template.hbs, you could render a P tag with hello world.
Yeah, no yield.
No yield.
No call.
And so nothing matters there, right? Now the next question is like, you want to render a button. Well, you can render a button in either case too. You put a button in the template.hbs file, you put a button in the return file, right? Now you want to render a button per tab, and you want to do that in the parent because that's kind of where it makes sense too. It's just the way I think about it. It makes sense, right? This is where it gets tough because in React, you have one of your properties is children. One of your props is children, and that is an array of the data structure. It's like a representation of what's going to be rendered, because what you return from the render function is like a virtual DOM representation. It's not like, that's why you can manipulate it. And if you return a manipulated version of that, React's going to render something different. Anyways, one of your props is children, and it gives you a data structure of what was passed in the block. So in this case, you have like two siblings, tab and tab. So you're going to have an array of two elements. And so you can just say children.map and then return a button, and now you'll have two buttons. Now in Ember, you can't do that. You don't have access really in the parent, or at least in a public way, in a tabs component where you can see kind of what was passed in.
Right. In fact, you need to do, every time I've entered into this in Ember, you have to do a render. You do a render, and then you inspect the HTML.
Yeah. So what you have to do is basically do a render and see what kind of comes out of it, or you use the children component lifecycle, and for each one of those tab components, once a tab is rendered, it can send a message to the parent.
Yep.
Or increment something, and that way the parent can still hold the state in a sense, but it's the fact of rendering that you need to wait. And this makes sense if you think about it, because that list of tabs, let's say it was from an array, like let's say it was from the server, that's a dynamic list. And so there's times where the rendering something from the parent depends on what's being rendered in the children. It's like back to the halting problem thing, and you can't know ahead of time without the active rendering. So I think this is a trade-off that is part of the design of Ember templates to keep them fast, because if you could do that, you wouldn't be able to like statically analyze them in the same way that you can.
Of course, and we've seen this. You can get an error in Ember where it's like you tried to set this property during the render phase.
Yeah.
Like this was inconsistent in Ember 1x.
It caused 2 renders.
Yeah, but now it's like it's actually not going to work or
Right.
something like that.
Right. So this is just kind of interesting because like, well, React. What if you like? What if you try to write a render function in React that just by the fact of rendering it changed what was rendered, which is kind of what we're talking about here. But like I imagine you can get in a loop, and it would be interesting to see what
you can. I've done this with set state. You can put set state in the render function and just own yourself.
Yep.
So yes,
and also like we hit this with the set state thing with the to do app, where in the demo in Mirage, where you click a to do and you complete it, and then it finishes, and the act of rendering caused the to do to be unrendered. So when you tried to set saving as false, it like blows up. It'd be interesting to dive in and see which parts of that are due, because like it was the same way I would have written the code in Ember, but I wouldn't have hit that error in Ember. And I think it's because Ember does more kind of batching or processing because it's not as dynamic.
Ember has its run loop queues.
It has a run loop, but then it also can look at a template and just know more about what's being rendered at which time because it's more static. It's not a complete unknown. I'd have to reproduce it and see what the equivalent is, but that's what my intuition tells me when working on this stuff.
I think in Ember, for this particular one, in Ember, all of your handlers are going to be sync. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if this is true or not in React. I'd imagine it is, but maybe not. But in Ember, you're going to call all your sets.
And there's going to be a queue, a flush thing. Whereas like in React, when you say handle did delete to do and then set is saving false, if you flip the order of those, that would change your program. Whereas in Ember, that's not true. If handle did delete caused the thing to be unrendered in the but you could still do it in the same synchronous thing. So that's kind of interesting. And yeah, we had to use like the second version of set state, use state to get the fresh version of it.
Yeah, this was another problem we ran into, where set state, where you have
use state,
you don't have a class in React, right?
Yeah.
You define all of your handlers inside your render function.
Yeah.
These are with functional components.
Yeah.
So if your handlers are going to modify state, they're basically closing over state.
Yeah.
So they're going to be modifying state at time of render.
Evaluation.
The time of render.
Yeah.
So if you do something like
if they're referencing state when they're defined and that state is old and it changes and it runs later, you're going to have a stale version of the state.
Right. So we have a timeout. When you complete a to-do, it waits a second before actually removing it. And the way it removes it is it says, okay, take all the existing to-dos, find the to-do I'm about to remove, and set new state to all the existing to-dos.
Minus that one.
But the problem is that function was defined at render time, and there's a 1 second delay before the remove. So if in between that render and 1 second delay, you add 5 to-dos, well, you're still using the state because your handler closed over the state at render time. So when you go to set it, you're saying all the current to-dos minus the 1. It's really not all the current to-dos. It's all the current to-dos as of a second ago.
Right.
Minus 1. And this is weird. This really...
By the way, you can see all this code on Mirage.js/site.
Yeah. This really tripped us up as Ember developers because our mental model is like, oh, we have a handler and it's going to use something like this .to-dos. Right. And that's always... It's an object and it's always referencing the to-dos. No matter when I call it. So set state has a second way of calling it where you can pass in a function. So it's like set state function, and the first parameter to that function is the current value of the state.
Yeah.
The React docs do a good job of this.
I felt it was super confusing, and it's not just because I'm an Ember developer.
Yeah. I think it's confusing to have two ways to do something. And then also too, I mean, maybe there's something performance or optimization here, but like, why not just, if the functional approach can solve all the cases, why not just always use a functional approach
to getting the latest version of state?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not set state should always be a function
So what does it use state?
Use state is going to return two things. It's going to return the state
Yep.
and a function. And that function can take a parameter to set the new state. So if you do like...
or it can take a function.
Or it can take a
yields
function.
The latest version of the state.
Right.
Yeah.
And so why not use
Interesting.
the function approach
Mm-hmm.
to always setting state?
Right, because if you just take the state, the reason I think this is confusing and not just because we're Ember developers is because if you take the state part, the first argument from useState back and put it in your render function, it is always going to be up to date. It's never going to be stale. That's the whole point of the model.
Yeah,
So that's why it's confusing.
It's not closed over.
Exactly.
It literally runs sequentially.
It's running over and over again. And so it's not about closures. I understand why a function that references the old value of state creates a closure and why therefore it's stale, but there's more going on than that. Just that you're not just writing JavaScript. You are writing JavaScript, but what React does with it is not an intuitive. It's not something you understand until you learn React. What this function means with hooks that are being rerun over and over again is part of React's API. And so the fact that one part of it is in sync and then the other part is stale, it's true that your JavaScript knowledge helps you understand why that is, but it's not something that you as a JavaScript developer can know until you learn React. So if you already have to learn how React is going to treat these different things in this part of your code, then why can't React just say, here's how you do it and here's how to get this state in a way that's never going to be stale, right?
No, but you can't because React state can be any value, like including primitives.
Mm-hmm.
So a state could be a number.
Yeah, I get that.
If you close over that number,
why closing over a number will give you the version that the value it was when you closed over it.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, like, because of the way they've decided to use the API decisions they've made means you can get a value for state, let's say counter, and render that in your thing. That is a primitive, it's a number, and it's always in your render function, and it's always going to be up to date.
Yes.
It's because that's the way the React API works. And so basically I'm saying the fact that pitfall exists is a problem with the API design. It's like leaky abstraction. It's like the problem with React's API design, where like the function version that gives you the latest version of state, to me that's like a smell that exists almost. When would you not want to use that? I guess that's maybe a better way to ask the question.
Yeah, so that's that. Well, it's a smell that exists.
And I understand that it's just JavaScript why the closure has to have the old version, but it's not actually a just JavaScript leap to go from when the setter is called to when this thing is rerun. Like that is all black box React. Yeah. And so they could change that. Like that's within their control.
Well, I mean, if it's event based, if it's like this thing is only going to run when I click the button, then you're running.
Nothing about JavaScript is going to tell you what happens when you call set count and then what's going to happen as a result in that function. They're running it with new values. They're running it again. That's React land.
Yes.
So they could do different things with it.
Sure. They could. Yeah. Okay. They could analyze your JSX and say like, even though you set this, nothing actually changed. So we're not even going to run your render function.
Yeah. Who knows? Like, it's just, the point is like, it's not just about JavaScript here. It's like a leaky abstraction in my mind. Why there's two versions of that and why it bites you. Also, it's not just us as Ember developers, because if you Google this, plenty of people run into this kind of thing. Oh, why do I have stale state in the way I'm using this hook here?
That's definitely fair, because there were a bunch of answers, and the answers to me were like, you don't. Some of them I was like, you understand this as well as I do, and I'm not following your advice.
Yeah, exactly. So like to me, the fact that in Ember you can do this dot set count plus one, and then this dot count, and it's up to date. That's like an API decision that Ember made. I don't care about how JavaScript works. That's they chose to do an API decision that says, how do you update state in Ember and how do you access it? And is it going to be consistent with your mental model? React has chosen an API mental model where here's how you update state and here's how you access it. And there are many times where it violates your expectations. And therefore I attribute that to bad API design and not to anything to do with JavaScript language, right? Because you could have said the same thing, you could say the same thing in either case. Ember could have made an API decision where that same confusing thing happened, but it doesn't,
right?
Because of their decisions to do things like batch, flush all of the changes before re-rendering and stuff like that.
I wonder if the answer comes down to if this is something where it's like, well, these are the trade-offs you have to make of having a single function represent and render. There's some mental.
But the function is an escape hatch, so there's already an escape hatch. Like the function, the second way to set state is an escape hatch.
No. I'm saying like having a single function, just like components are just single functions, and because we think that approach is so important and so good that we'll make all these concessions with. There's two ways to set state.
But they didn't have to do that. There could have just been one way to do it, and you never would have had this problem.
God.
I'd be.
Wait, hold on. When you say,
I'd be interested to know if there's a use case where you do not want the latest version of state when you call set state on something.
Yeah. So why does
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's the way to answer, I think.
Would you
I've
accept,
been a little.
Would you accept an answer that was non-architecture based? So if
No.
someone said like it's faster, we would dismiss that.
Yeah,
I would totally
no, they
dismiss
wouldn't.
that.
They wouldn't say that. No. They're all about API design and ergonomics. That's the whole point of the whole thing. It's
Okay,
not
so
about
that's a good Stack Overflow question.
Yeah. Part of why I'm kind of in a ranting mood is because I think the idea that React is just JavaScript is basically just that's as meaningless as saying Ember is just JavaScript. And so the things that I've learned,
aren't they all just JavaScript?
the things that I've learned building the React app is like about React and React's API's decisions. And so now I will say back to our points about kind of API design and high level versus low level. Once you learn that in the case of like the render function and you are in the tabs component. So basically going back to this whole thing, which is like in Ember, you are rendering a tabs with two tab children. How do you just render two buttons? You have to do some weird stuff with the children to tell the parent how many have been rendered, so the parent can then render it, and it's gonna be like just a lot. And whereas in React, you just get children as as a prop, and you can just do that. And not only can you do that, once you render those two buttons, set up some event handlers so that when you click the button, you just set active tab to either 0 or 1. You can then say children array accessor active tab. So like if the active tab is 0, just look at my first child in children and just render its children. And that way that's like yielding it out. And that's amazing because like in Ember, we have the point of abstraction where you say nav.link and I'm going to render something in place of that. But I can't say, render the first one, but not the second one. I mean, you'd have to do like crazy hacks to do that.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to do a lot of wiring to do that kind of thing.
Do you can yield? You can like yield 1, yield 2.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like you can if 1, if 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that is the part that's like, I think it's what people mean when they say it's just JavaScript. I just don't think that's a good way to do it. I think the better way to say it is like, because we've chosen to use JavaScript to represent, chosen to use JavaScript to represent what's being rendered, you get to leverage your existing JavaScript knowledge. But it's not that React is just JavaScript. It's that, like in this case, what is being rendered is a JavaScript object, which has a bunch of React stuff on it. So you still have to like you have to know about children and know what it means. And you can't just access anything there. But a lot of it is just like direct property access and array manipulation. So you get to leverage that stuff instead of like being in a template class or something that's like with a different language.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's what you said earlier. It's you can use your existing knowledge.
Yeah,
you just said that, but you could. There are situations you find yourself in where your existing intuition. Yes. It's not even knowledge. It's intuition.
100%, because you're
applies.
not. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. It's the same thing with the GraphQL viewer. Can we make a GraphQL viewer in such a way that it is a self-discovering interface, that the thing that the programmer needs to get the job done, they will be able to do by virtue of their existing knowledge and intuition. And if you give me something that says children and I look at it in the inspector and it happens to have two elements that are tabs that have children, they have props too. So back to the question about how do you render the button with the right label, you have to look in the props of the child. Well, I was in the dev tools and I just did it, and I saw that the child had a props with its own children property and props.name, which I happen to pass in. So now I can just, you're telling me I can just children.map, render a button, and do child.props.name and get that in my parents template in the button content? Yeah, that is right. And you just try that and it works. So that's extremely powerful. And I think that's a property that is super important when it comes to API design. And I know we're probably running long. Where are we at right now?
We're about an hour. We're good.
I think thinking about what's been such a problem for Ember a lot, and going forward, like what kind of API decisions and features and stuff make sense, trying to get cute and fancy and, making a new world that's going to make your world better. It's like you don't realize that you leave that stuff behind and you're not working with the existing knowledge and intuition that the people have.
Yes, totally. I think a Ember rebuttal here would be like, but you can create a constrained world that provides optimizations.
Yeah, I think so. Going kind of touching back on like Tom's tweet about, he was kind of tweeting about during the Backbone era, rendering being like, basically it was a no-op in Backbone. Like Backbone render functions are literally no-op. And he was talking about why he's frustrated with web components. Web components are designed to be isolated, right? And a lot of the web component advocates who like chastise JavaScript developers for not using web components, because obviously why wouldn't you? They're reusable and like they're global. They don't need a framework, even if they need like polyfill libraries. But why wouldn't you use a web component for your button? Because you can use it in anything. You're not tied to a framework, right? As you start doing this more and more, Tom's argument is like large, complex JavaScript apps need an orchestrator at the top to understand how data moves throughout the whole thing, because the feature of web components or a Backbone view or whatever is also a bug. The feature being isolated is also a bug in that it's isolated and that the whole system cannot analyze it and in a way that's going to let the system optimize it. So if you think about how Ember works, templates being static, like the Ember application at runtime, at build time and runtime between the two, can look at like every template in your app and just know, like the parent app that's rendering can just know that this thing way down here is like a HBS file with like 5 HTML elements and nothing dynamic is ever going to change them. Whereas like that's not true for a web component. If it's isolated, like the Ember app has to treat the web component as a black box. And how does it know, like if it needs to change, how can it optimize it? How can it know which parts are static, right? All the frameworks have chosen different ways to know which parts are static and dynamic, what can be cached, what can be memoized, what can be optimized. And so the whole point is like, if everything is isolated, then you don't get those benefits. So Tom was kind of lamenting the fact that this is like an inevitable conclusion of like this road that you're going down with kind of isolated things, where you're going to set yourself up for failure, where you start scaling up your app, and because you've made them out of reusable islands, then you are eventually going to hit issues, right? So he's talked about this before and said things like, well, it's almost like, he's like, I basically didn't know how to make the argument in 2011 with Backbone. I don't know how to make the argument today with people talking about web components or even like little React apps or whatever. It's almost like an eat your greens argument, because it's like, if you don't listen to me, once you scale up, like you are going to hit a situation where your app is slow and there's nothing you can do about it because you've chosen architecturally, like you've made decisions that are going to make this out of things that are impossible to optimize. The reason I want to tell that story is because it was similar to like this thing with children that I experienced writing the React component, which is that you could understand why you can't do something like that in Ember, and why like just giving a JavaScript developer children and like, oh, look, you can just do children.props.children.props.children.props and like render that in the parent template. It's like completely dynamic. Like there's no constraints on that at all. Yep. And like our friend Taras said that the way yields work in React, which is basically like return children, there is no concept of yield, because it's returning children is how you yield, but it's not actually, you're just returning a call to create element in a different way. Versus an Ember has a specific thing called yield. And it's more to learn, but it actually, if you kind of buy these people at their word, or like Taurus' story was like, it's actually super optimized, because Dan Freeman also said the same thing on Twitter, which is like, because Ember knows you're yielding a child, and usually it's like taking the block of a child and putting it right here in the parent, Ember can optimize for that and keeps it fast. And so you can have very complex system of contextual components, children yielding children, the kind of way we build forms, and we don't really run into performance issues there. And apparently it's possible or easy to do that given the dynamic nature of the render function in React. I think my point here, or just like from where I stand now, is like, even if we've never hit performance issues doing this kind of thing in Ember, and therefore like this has been good for us, all we know is the times we've been limited by it as Ember developers. All we know are the things that I ran into, which is like, I just want to render 2 buttons because I have 2 tabs, and you're telling me that it's impossible, and I'm using React, and they just say, here's children, here's a JavaScript array, do whatever you want with it. And it's like, that's an important feeling. That's an important decision to make, because you're going to win people over in the early stages, those early days, the beginning parts of their project. They're going to feel good because you're entrusting them with a lot of power, and they're going to say, you know what, if I can get this much done at this point, then I know even if I hit problems down the road, like we have people who are going to help us figure that out. I feel like that's a much better approach to success and popularity and sustainability than trying to limit someone so much that they feel hobbled. They feel like hobbled by your technology early on.
Yeah, I mean,
it seems almost unrecoverable.
Yes, I mean, just we talk a lot about like, or we've talked about like the emotional stuff.
Yeah,
and that's what you're reminding me of. It's like you're just telling someone they can't do something.
Yeah,
and that's really bad. Like that's really bad.
It's really bad. It's like I think it's like unrecoverable. Like so if you truly believe that you cannot do the thing that's good in the long term without saying no in the small, it's like what you want to actually do is like scope down and take a problem where you don't have to make that concession up front.
Oh, interesting.
Because like you're not going to win if you have to wag your finger at someone and they're going to feel like crap using your thing early on. Like, I'm not saying there's nothing to large scale architecture. I'm just saying it's extremely important because people have so many competing. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to put words in your mouth, but you're almost saying that like a problem that you can't build up to, a problem where you have to say no in the beginning, is basically a problem not worth solving.
Yeah.
Or not worth solving, but unsolvable.
It's unsolvable in a certain sense, which is this. We live in a world of uncertainty, and so for every person you have saying, eat your greens, do it like this, you're going to have 5 other people saying conflicting things. And so at the end of the day, you can't make an argument that convinces people because people have been burned by things you've said or others have said in the past, and people have different situations. And so therefore, because we have uncertainty and those things are true, you need some way to give people a proxy for if this thing's right, can they trust you? Is it going to help them in the short term and the long term? And if you don't give them something that's real to them, that addresses a real pain point they have or solves a real need they have, all you have left is politics. And then you're just standing on a soapbox trying to make an argument. I think it's way, way better for someone, again, who's in my situation. I need to render 2 buttons. Okay, here you go, JavaScript developer. Here's an array, and you can return anything you want. And it's like, now is that going to get me into trouble? But like, I don't have trouble right now. So you telling me go do these 5 other steps to solve your problem because I'm going to help you avoid trouble in a year from now. That's just like, that's not where you want to be. Like,
yeah. Also too, every time,
and it's also not even true all the time.
Right. Well, that's exactly the thing. It's also, we will write code that's inefficient today, knowing that when this code becomes a hot path, we can figure out how to optimize it, or there'll be a community solution optimizing it. So yes, it's you cannot predict the future and say you're going to hang yourself in a year from now.
So I think like tools that are basically their selling point is based on predicting the future are just like setting themselves up for failures, like not good place you want to be. You want to be thinking about the real pain points that your users are having and a way to meet those today. And yeah, just some of the thoughts I've had building Reacts, because it, you know, again, there's some things, the way the marketing is gone, or, oh, it's so great, it's just JavaScript. Some of that stuff is like bothers me. But the part of the React model that I appreciate is like, they don't talk down to you. They are like, the power's in your hands, JavaScript developer. Here's how you, here's like the few things you need to know. And then from there you go to town. And like, yeah, there's like a ton of decisions I'm making building this, even this small site, that's like coming from my background in Ember, building larger applications and understanding the architecture there, coming from my experience being a front-end developer for 5 or 6 years. Like if I was starting out, I'd be making a mess. I mean, you know, and so there's times there where you're like in, you know, again, like the Rails stuff where you just want, here's how you do it, you know, but there's parts of the domain here that are not well understood enough. And so just do this is not really what you want.
The Rails,
you want the pain point, right?
Yes.
Rails is effective if you're came from a homegrown PHP solution where you were cobbling things together. Rails in 15 minutes demo was super compelling because they were saying, look at everything I'm not doing, because people had done that. But if you didn't, you wouldn't know, why do I have to learn about where to put this file, right? Like, it's important to know the pain points that are being addressed, that are solving.
Yeah, I wonder if Rails, so Rails, like a big takeaway in Rails is everything should be resources. Like just model everything as resources.
Yeah.
Your job will be so much easier.
Yep.
You have a session resource. You have a post-publish resource.
Right. Publication resource or subscription instead of a /subscribe action.
So the thing, as you were telling this, like Rails though doesn't tell you can't do that.
Yeah.
In fact, they make it really easy. If you want to write an API endpoint that's like
true.
post/1/publish that you post to. Someone pointed out that I should not use the example posts and post requests because it's too confusing. So I'm going to try not to do that.
Article
/1/publish, and you post to that. You can do that, and it's really easy. Rails has like a whole API for adding that. So even though like you'll go see Rails talks that say don't do this, they don't make it impossible to do, and they also give you an API to make it easy to do.
That's a really good, interesting point. Adam has a talk basically talking about refactoring the resources in Laravel, and it's the same thing. It's like, oh, look at this Laravel app that has this non-resourceful thing. Seems reasonable. I was coding this and I needed to send an email, so I wrote a send email action and I did it, and that was fine. I was never angry at Laravel. Like I just wrote this function because that's what I needed. And then you start to see why it causes problems later on. And so there's a talk that's like refactoring that, but you can do both things in Laravel.
and there's a path. So when it does become an issue, there's a path off of it.
Yeah. So like you could imagine something like that. Like, by the way, intermediate React developer, making your render function depend on dynamic things that are rendered in its children means that we can't do anything to help you optimize this component because it's dynamic, and therefore we have to wait until you render it to even know what to render. And that's like a problem. And now you understand why that's a problem, because you needed it in this case where you wanted to write a component that accepted an arbitrary number of tabs, right? Well, here's how you might solve this problem in like, right? And this is where like memo and lazy, there's like React memo and React lazy, and there's things like that help you optimize React components.
Interesting.
But at their core, they are 100% dynamic. The data is literally just anything. Like you can take your props that has children and you can return anything you want. So that is an API decision that I think originally I would have said, 2 years ago would have said like, oh, it's great to have the deliberately underpowered technology to keep people in constraints. And while that is true, you have to be wary that you're going to put too much constraints on, A. B, that you haven't foreseen some of the problems that you think you did. That's the other thing about giving people lower level things that are maybe not optimized. Yeah. You don't know what problems they're going to run into. And by erring on the lower level side, you are being honest about what you don't know and making it less likely that people are going to run into things. That's some of the biggest things I've noticed about that. Now, of course, like there's a whole ecosystem of libraries in React that solve some of the problems in different ways and lead to their own pitfalls and all this stuff. But it's trade-offs, and not feeling constrained by your tool and that it's always helping you solve your problem and it's not going to get in your way and it's treating you like an adult. I think those are important things, and it's a good feeling, you know.
The adult thing is good. They're like, don't talk down.
Yeah.
It's really good to have that voice in the back of your head, because I think it's really easy to like tell your story.
Oh
and
yeah,
just build
super
it,
constrained API.
Build it up from the ground level.
Totally.
Where
Super constrained API. Oh, if anytime anyone needs anything new here, I'm going to stop and think about it myself and make sure I do it in the right way. Sometimes there's something to be said for, the low level thing that's a little more wiring to use, a little more painful to use, but it's an emergent thing that you get to the higher level things eventually, but you don't start with them, you know?
I really like, the emergent stuff is I think really important.
And if your beautiful high level API accounts covers 80 or 90% of your users' cases, and then they have there's one or two files where they drop down to the low level escape hatch and it's like ugly and it bothers you, then, well, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's a great thing that they were able to write one file, a one-off file, where they added a CSS thing. Like, think about it, like, right? Tailwind is like, you can like use Tailwind, and then like if I ever need to, I can just open up a CSS file and like do that. That's great. Mm-hmm. That's great. I don't have to buy into it completely, you know? So imagine what some of those escape hatches would look like in Ember, where you have a component that's de-optimized, but it gives you children. And like, oh, now my table of contents dynamic nav thing and add-on docs can just render based on its dynamic children. And you know what? It's not going to be like a Glimmer component that's like statically analyzed and all. I don't need that right now. This is what I need.
Or I have a template with expression in it. And I don't care.
Right, and the helpers are there as a path to like,
to efficiency.
To efficiency, to solve a problem. Whereas a problem you have right now is I want to write some JavaScript here and I can't. The helper feels like a bludgeon. It feels like a heavy-handed tool for that. There might be reasons for the design there that keep things fast, but that's not what you need right then. You just need to write some JavaScript right then.
That's it. This is great, because also too, I know those reasons, or I can at least talk about those reasons.
It's back to eat your greens. You have to know them.
But I want to opt out of them here, because it's for what I need to get done today.
Yeah.
I'm actually okay with skipping them.
Exactly. And this is like the use state thing with React. It's like, oh, no, but it's a JavaScript closure. That's how it works. I don't care. Like, don't explain to me how it works. It's like, understand, be empathetic with my situation where I am right now in the part of the program I'm writing as a developer, and see why this is confusing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's important to know what problems your users are dealing with.
Interesting.
Anyways, I don't even know what this podcast is about anymore. I literally don't even know what we're talking about. Something. I'm having fun with React.
I wanted to ask you. Wait, I just want to ask you two quick things. One is when you talked about the children component, the children, and you did like props.children, array accessor, active tab.
Yeah.
Did you know that was a public API, or did you just do it and it worked? I did, and you just moved on.
I did it and moved on.
Okay, yeah. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I actually don't know that. I don't actually know if it's. Even I think there's like I think Dave Wasmer was telling me children is supposed to be opaque, which I think by which he means you're not supposed to actually look at it and access it. I think there's like a toArray method on it.
Oh, so you would like children.toArray.
I think
accessor.
I think so, but it's in production right now. And
I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it is super.
Tried it, did it worked, and you moved on.
Yeah.
And then my other question is like, okay, so if you were going to go back to Ember and start, because you are going to have to work on Ember apps to do this.
Yeah.
Are you like okay using like the register as, or?
Oh, like basically you're saying the specific case where you have a render, the parent's template depends on the children being rendered.
Table of contents, tabs. Are you okay like using register as.
I still don't have a satisfactory solution there. I think I would be good to like boil it down and like post it on thing and see what Ed says or something like that. But like basically,
okay, so it would like register as isn't your
No,
complaint.
I hate that.
Your complaint isn't that register as is undiscoverable and you have to like understand Ember. It's like you also just hate jumping through those hoops.
yes, but even okay, there's a couple layers here. Register as, understanding yield, back to the API discussion. Yeah, that sucks for a developer who has to learn that. Whereas if you say, oh, it's just JavaScript, like this part of the render function is just JavaScript, that means I can use it like this. Boom. That's one thing. The other thing is that the register as thing is literally saying, I have to wait until I render you to know how many tabs are being rendered. And then I can decide how many buttons to render in the parent. But if you give me a template, I can look at your template and see 2 buttons. It's static. That's not dynamic. That's static. If you were to give me that at build time, I could know how many buttons to render. So to me, it seems like if I'm not doing each, count as button and then rendering button, like I get that. You have to actually render that to know how many buttons to render. And so you have to do like a registration thing because you have to wait until the render happens for the parent to know. But if you give me a template that's tabs, tab, tab, I can just look at that and say there's 2. To me, the system should be able to basically, that's data. That's a static data. That's like 2 things. That's like, do you see what I'm saying? Like
I do, but I don't think the
template,
static dynamic thing matters.
Listen, no, it does, because if you were in a parent template and you wrote, if you're in the tabs parent template and you wrote button and then button, like button and button, like that's 2. And like Glimmer does everything, like it all is just like there. It's like doesn't need to wait to be rendered. It knows ahead of time what is going to be rendered. It doesn't have to wait for a rendering pass to know because the 2 things are right there. Yep. To me, if those are both tab, it should be the same thing, but it's not.
I see. So you want access to the information that Glimmer knows.
Or something like, yes, like you should get, it's almost like you want a prop that's like static children or something like that, or my template and it's, or whatever it is. Like,
I guess the thing that I'm getting tripped up on is like React children can still be dynamic.
It is dynamic. It's just an array. That's all it is. Whether the calling template had written it twice or used a loop or something.
Right.
Because of the reconciliation phase, like you return it and then like the VDOM does its thing. To me, even this is an area where it's like, this is like the progressive thing where it's like, no, if you want to keep things really fast, then you need to like register because like technically we don't know, but there's a case where you know it and we can give you like, it's almost like pre-rendering it. It's like pre-render it and you get a prop that's like static children or something like that. And if you ever do anything based on static children, it's as if you were to just write button in your template and it's just as fast and like you don't need to do any registration because you don't have to wait to render to know, because if I just look at your template, I know. I don't have to wait.
Interesting that this is probably information that Glimmer knows.
Yeah, because the whole point with register as is, and the whole point of like the design of the template system is that for things that you have to, it's the halting problem stuff. You can't know ahead of time. You have to render it to know what to render. But in this case, we don't have to render it to know what to render. I can look at the template and say, I need 2 buttons. If I can say that, the computer should be able to say that.
Yeah.
So it's a special case.
Yeah, there are templates where there's no programming language.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's no control flow, there's no loops. Exactly. But I can understand why, if you have a loop that's rendering tabs and each tab is rendered in the context of a loop, the loop data could come from a server call. The Ember app doesn't know ahead of time until it's rendered how many buttons to render.
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
No. But
load data, yield.
But I guess there's a difference between like I'm ready to render and I've actually painted on the screen.
But I'm saying like,
and you could know, like React can know how many tabs there's going to be before you actually draw anything in the browser.
Yeah, that's separate. That's separate. This is like, do you have to run the program to know? Like, and I'm saying this is static. You don't have to run the program to know. With React, you have to run the program to know anything because it's all completely dynamic. Right. You could literally return anything. Any render. Doesn't matter if your calling template puts 2 static buttons. The parent could return an array of 100 things and have it be any 100 marquee elements. It's all completely dynamic. There's
I
no
guess-
constraints on it.
I guess you're pulling this apart more because I guess I don't really. I want the thing to run the program and then just tell me. I want to wait in Ember for it to run the program and then tell me about.
Yeah. Yes.
Tell me about the internals of what it just.
Yeah,
ran.
and what I'm saying is like there's an in between here where if you want the people who are working on Ember to be able to keep the static nature of their templates so that it's fast, we should have. There is still there is an intermediate escape hatch for certain cases where the thing is static, that you can let us do these things
Best
without.
of both
Yeah,
worlds.
exactly. Yes.
Seems hard. I mean, maybe not. Maybe there's. Yeah,
dude,
maybe
you could write a freaking template transform that's
You're right. I mean, a build time
like, let's
thing
say
that you build.
everywhere everything where it says children, you just replace that. You look at the collar or something, and I don't know.
You have like static.
It's right
you have
there
like static,
in the template. It's
you have
data.
Static children, and if it can be generated, yeah. You could write your tabs component or your table of contents component that rendered it build time.
Yeah.
And replace
Exactly.
the component with a static HTML.
Exactly.
Or if it noticed that any of its children that it was going to use to build the table of contents
Were static.
Had dynamic data.
Yeah, then it wouldn't.
could throw an error.
Yeah, exactly. Or just
wouldn't.
wait
It's
until
just-
client side
yeah.
time. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Exactly right. Yes, 100%. 100%. And Glimmer already does this kind of thing for like if you have like a title component and it renders an H2 and there's nothing dynamic in it, it just has like some tailwind classes, let's say, and then contents. It's like super optimized. Basically as if you're not even rendering a component. It's like going to be super fast. So this is just another layer of that. And theoretically, there's no reason you can't do that. It's all right there. It's just data. It's just in the template. It's literally static data. Okay, that makes sense?
It does. And just, yeah.
Yeah, it's way easier to come at it from the other perspective, right? It's way easier to start dynamic and then say, how can we optimize these hot paths with things like lazy or whatever, where you tell me what needs to change or whatever. So that's like the approach that React has taken.
Yeah, or even like...
Start with maximal power so that no one hits a thing, and then we'll deal with the fallout from that when it comes.
Yeah, I would like that. That would help me in Ember.
Seems like a nice way to build libraries because
you can kick the can down the road. Yeah, you don't have to predict the future.
Yeah, and if you make a decision such that you literally can't get out of it, you kick the can, but then like the day of reckoning comes. Okay, like maybe that could happen, but it doesn't seem like that happens. It seems like because there's so many unknowns, better to start off like that.
Cool. All right, we should wrap this.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, is it like even July anymore? Like, is everyone like doing visual programming now? It's been like decades of research. I feel like we've been in here for like 10 years.
We could be in here for 10 years and people still aren't doing visual programming.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's depressing. All right. Thank you for listening to us ramble. It's 73 degrees outside, which is better than 92, which is what it was over the weekend.
It cooled down.
It did.
Yeah, I was in New York City on Saturday. Dude, it just smelled like garbage everywhere.
That's why you got to go to the Jersey beaches.
It just smelled.
Which apparently is what everyone does, because when we came back...
Jersey beaches don't smell like garbage?
No, they don't. That's the thing I learned.
Shots fired in New Jersey.
No, man, tell you. Jersey beaches, Delaware beaches, they're actually nice.
Yeah, they're super nice.
Super nice. I didn't know, but I think people not from this area are like, oh, Jersey beaches, like Jersey Shore. Like, oh, isn't that weird? You know what I'm saying? It's like super...
Yeah.
But it's not like that. Well, there's parts of them that are very, very schwanky. So that's what you do. You get 10 degrees cooler. All right. Now let's go convert some tests. That's what I'm going to do next.
Nice.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Half of you.